This is the BTOWN podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of the BTOWN podcast. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you for another week of shows here in B-Town. Today we welcome a B-Town regular, Attorney General Peter Neronha, for a specific conversation on action that his office has taken against area landlords for outstanding lead violations. So I got a press release last week, reads as follows. Attorney General Neronha announced that the office has taken enforcement action against two Providence landlords who own and operate property built in 1900 that has had multiple cases of lead poisoning in children. After a third child tested positive for elevated levels of lead, the Rhode Island Department of Health conducted an inspection of the property that revealed several unresolved lead hazards, including in bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms, and the soil surrounding the property. So this is an issue. Obviously, we have a lot of older properties here in Rhode Island. Being in New England, I mean, that goes without saying. But boy, when we talk about housing, when we talk about environmental racism, all of these types of things, here's a point-blank example of stuff that's going on in our community that is extremely dangerous, extremely important to address, and it's something that the Attorney General has taken action on. And we're going to get into the specifics in this conversation of just how widespread this issue is, because that's the big question, right? You have action taken against two landlords, but how big a problem is this statewide? And it's obviously an acute issue to examine that could impact you directly or someone you care about in terms of the lead paint specifically, but it's also a good vessel to explore and understand. When we talk about the division of equity here in Rhode Island, this is a perfect example of where some of this stuff plays out. So again, welcoming the Attorney General back, welcoming you as always here on Rhode Island's podcast of record. Remember, you can support the show for as little as $3 per month by heading to patreon.com/BartholomewTown. And without further ado, Attorney General Peter Neronha. All right, Attorney General Neronha, welcome back to B-Town. And today we've got a really, it's an acute issue, but it's also one that is very specific when we talk about the division of equity in our society here in Rhode Island, and I think in general, but obviously we have a lot of older properties in Rhode Island, and lead paint, it's serious business, and it's one of those that sometimes, falls on the back burner, especially when you're talking about the real estate industry, where it's just obviously profit is the number one goal and maintenance is the number two goal. Remediating violations isn't always top of mind. So your office last week put out this presser that you've, for lack of a better term, cracked down on two particular landlords in Providence for outstanding lead paint violations. I guess explain the issue as a whole and then the action that the office is taking.
Yeah, look, it's a really important issue, Bill, that, as you point out, flies under the radar. I think because of the limited voice that the people that most impact have. And I think, if you go up to 50,000 feet, I think that's the importance of this office when we're really thinking about our role actively. We have to speak for those in Rhode Island that aren't capable sometimes of speaking for themselves. So what's the issue? The issue is, as you point out, there's a lot of older homes in Rhode Island. And if there's an older home in Rhode Island that was built before 1978, the odds of it having lead paint in it are nearly universal. Because that's when, until that point, lead paint was the only paint being used around the state and everywhere across the country. So as a result, that lead paint, as it deteriorates, whether it be in the form of dust or chips, kids and adults are exposed to it. So both inside and outside the home. So if there's lead paint on the outside of the house, it's falling off the house, it's getting in the soil and the grass where the kids play, and also inside the home, it's inside the home. So it causes real bad effects for both children and pregnant women mostly. For adults, mostly pregnant women. For children, developmental issues, behavioral issues, things that will last well on into adulthood. It's really, really dangerous. So the way the problem is identified is kids are, generally speaking, given a lead paint test at least twice between the ages of about 6 months and when they're 3 years old. And the good news is because we have a high degree of health insurance in Rhode Island, most kids are having annual physicals at that age. So when they're having that physical, the doctors are ordering the tests, and those tests go to the Department of Health. And when you hit a certain threshold of lead in the bloodstream, that triggers an inspection by the Department of Health of the property where that child lives. When that happens, the Department of Health goes out and they will inspect the property for lead paint, and whether that lead paint has been remediated. And remediation doesn't necessarily mean strip it all down and repaint. Sometimes it's just sanding it down in the right way and repainting over it so that it's not flaking off or dusting off or all that other kind of thing. So we're not talking necessarily about a large money to remediate. In any event, Department of Health goes out there and they will order if they find lead paint. And there are certain properties that are subject to the lead remediation laws, not owner-occupied sole dwellings, for example, and frankly, not owner-occupied buildings under a certain number of units. But for all units, all residential properties that are subject to it, they have to remediate it. The trouble has been is that these landlords don't take the Department of Health as seriously as they should. So the Department of Health will issue a notice of violation. And after 30 days, if the property is not remediated, they don't get a lead compliance certificate as they're required to do at that point. Actually, prior to that, there'll be a second notice of violation. And then once the second notice of violation, which basically means clean it up, is ignored, then our office under state law can step in and bring a lawsuit to force compliance. The reality is that this office had not been doing that work for a very long time. And it was pretty clear to me that when you have 500 kids, and that's the number, every year that are lead poisoned in the state, then we needed to do something about it, just to back up the Department of Health and make sure that these properties were remediated. And one of the problems is it's not just one kid in that particular unit that's being hurt. You know, we filed a number of cases. The one we filed last week was not the first one. We filed several others late last year. You know, if you're blowing off the Department of Health, as was the case last year, for a decade, this landlord had not remediated, notwithstanding being on notice of the issue of the property. That's not just one family. The way people move today, that's one family is in for a couple of years, next family comes in, and as every family comes in, those are more kids exposed. So it's a significant problem. It impacts 500 kids every year. It's not difficult to remediate lead paint. Somebody has to make certain landlords do the right thing, and that's what we're doing. And what we've also found is as we take action against some landlords, there have been a number of others that once we've advised them by letter, we don't have to go to court. They're actually doing it because now they know the litigation threat from our office is real. And so I think over time, we're going to see great progress in this space, this really important space.
500 kids that's an enormous amount of kids. I mean, it's a widespread problem. And then, of course, there are the people who either they're symptomatic, but they don't have access to healthcare, or perhaps they aren't showing any symptoms. I mean, obviously their blood is tested fairly universally, so there is a pretty good measurement, but the problem could be even larger. And I mean, never mind retroactively thinking into historically how this has impacted people. Is this like one of the major issues when we talk about housing? Obviously, it's about the availability of housing, but when we talk about the availability of safe, quality housing where people can pursue a high quality of life, is this one of the major issues that the state's facing right now in your mind?
Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly in a place where we can do, I think, a lot of good. I mean, the way the lead paint laws are, there's a role for the Attorney General here if you simply decide to exercise it. I mean, I think that's something we try to do here is to understand what our powers are and use them. I mean, the powers are all well and good. It's all well and good to have a set of tools in your toolbox, but if you never use them, what good are you doing for the people of the state? But yeah, I think when it comes to housing, it's a significant one. There are many others. You're right, availability in the first place. And then if it is available, not only is lead paint a problem, is the heating system adequate? Is there a rodent or other pest problem in these spaces? And we see that a lot. And look, I think that's really the responsibility of municipal code enforcement. Lead is almost unique in our ability to supplement, in a lot of the localities. Central Falls is a great example. You do a lot of great lead work in Central Falls. Providence does it pretty well too. The reality, though, is that in certain places, the agency needs to step up and stand behind the state agency like the Department of Health to really drive change, and that's what we're doing here. But yeah, it's a concern when there are 500 kids whose behavioral and physical development is potentially impacted by a problem that is not that difficult to solve. If there's a will to do it, then that's something we really need to be focused on.
What are the penalties for a landlord that has these outstanding violations and basically blows off the Department of Health and it gets to the point where your office gets involved and they end up in court?
Yeah, look, for every day that there's a lead paint problem and you're aware of it, the monetary penalty is $5,000 per day. And it's a continuing violation. Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's really high. And so there's a good hammer here to use. We need to be prepared to do it. And that money, when it's recovered, goes back to the Department of Health for lead remediation. So it's not like it's going off to a pot of money somewhere. I know we get this a lot, the General Assembly is going to waste it. That's not a principle that I'm buying into, but there's a lot of concern whenever we recover monies on behalf of the state. We do that quite a bit here in the office. This money goes back to remediation. Look, our hope and our objective is we want these landlords to do what they need to do. And if it's the prospect of a lawsuit and significant penalties to make them do it, great. At the end of the day, I'm not looking to take landlords to court and bankrupt them. What I'm looking to do is to get them to do what they need to do, which is to clean up these properties, protect children, and do it in a way that it does not cost a lot of money to them. And there are lots of programs, grants and otherwise, that can help landlords pay for this work. It's not a matter of money. It's not a matter of money in terms of being prohibitive. It's a matter of money and elevating rent receipts over the healthcare of the children who live in the properties. And as you're striking that balance, it's obvious to me, and I think it's obvious to nearly everyone, where the equities and the justice lies. It's in protecting those children.
Well, the Omicron wave, it's not over yet here in Rhode Island, but we do see a light at the end of the tunnel, that's for sure. And with that, a return to live events. Stay in the loop by following me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, I guess LinkedIn if you want to go there. Just search for me, Bill Bartholomew.
Now back to BTOWN.
One thing we saw and we still continue to see in the short-term rental, Airbnb, Vrbo, all this kind of stuff issue is that you've got landlords or property owners, I suppose, that are properly adhering to whether it be municipal codes or ordinances or policies and procedures of the platform Airbnb and state law and so on and so forth, paying taxes in an appropriate way. And then next door, they've got somebody who's just saying, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take this property that shouldn't be in any way, shape, or form commercial and basically turn it into a micro hotel. And there's little enforcement. So you have essentially a pot of property owners that are saying, hey, wait a minute, we're doing things the right way. And our business is impacted because supply is increased by people who are doing it the wrong way. Have you heard from landlords who have done things the right way when it comes to lead paint remediation that are saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a level playing field if there's not enforcement taken against those who are violating?
Well, I think we've hit the nail on the head, right? Which is so much of the work that we do here is about leveling the playing field. So lots of examples of that. This is one of them. You're absolutely right. Consumer protection is another one. Businesses that are treating consumers the right way are at an economic disadvantage to those that aren't, right? Same thing with environmental enforcement. Companies that are complying with environmental laws and regulations, getting the permits they need, controlling their pollutants, are at an economic disadvantage to those who aren't doing those things and able to run their businesses more cheaply. So whether you're talking about consumer protection or environmental protection or things like public access, right? There's another example where what this office, it's not, sometimes there's an accusation that wage theft is another great example, right? When you're stealing wages of work, it's like you're not paying them for the last 2 weeks of work because you know the job's over and you don't need them back after 2 weeks. So you just hold the last paycheck and you keep it, right? They're making more money than the company that pays their workers fairly. Again, what this office does, in my view, when we're taking these actions against businesses, we're not anti-business, we're pro-business. We are protecting the equities. We're leveling the playing field for businesses that do it the right way. Whether we're talking about lead paint or public access or consumer protection or environmental protection or healthcare, the reality is that that's this office's mission, is to create a fair playing field for everybody. Everybody wins. Public wins. Companies that are doing it the right way win. And look, I think that really is one of our driving principles here when we're talking about the civil division's work.
Last question, I guess it's a two-parter. One, the lead issue, is that something that in commercial properties is also something that is of concern, or is how it's tough to track that, I suppose, based on testing a kid? You don't have a ton of exposure time necessarily. You might in a daycare center, you might in a school, I guess, but a church, these types of places. Is that something that is on your radar screen? And then when you look at the lead issue, what other issues? I mean, you mentioned heat, you mentioned rodents. What else is maybe in the hopper, or something that in terms of leveling the playing field is on your mind, perhaps in it that could be approached similarly to how you're approaching the lead paint issue?
Yeah, look, I think, what I see when I look around the state, to answer that question, is there are a lot of state agencies, CRMC, perfect example, working for public access. Property owners are told, remove that fence, remove that obstruction, remove those gates. They issue notices of violation. The property owners don't do anything. It's the role of this office to frankly be the heavy in the room and make sure that happens. We've had some success there in public access. So, I think generally speaking, we're always looking for those opportunities to leverage, frankly, the authority and the ability of this office to be a serious, I don't want to overstate it, but to be a serious threat to those who would harm Rhode Islanders. I think there is this feeling out there that government is weak, and that if government is telling you to do something, well, they're just going to blow government off. And look, when government's doing its job, it's protecting everyday Rhode Islanders. It's leveling the playing field. And we've got to talk the talk. We got to walk the walk. If we're telling you to do the right thing, if there's clearly, for example, a right of way at the end of Public Street, ironically named, where the public doesn't have access to Narragansett Bay, well, if we say, look, the public is entitled to that access, you need to move your obstructions, and they don't. If we don't do anything, well, that sends a very bad message. We've got to prepare to act, and that's what we're doing in the lead paint space and in other places around the state, in other subject matter areas. So I want us to work to get the best results for Rhode Islanders. But when we need to go to court to make that happen, you can't hesitate to do that. You have to walk the walk, and that's what we're trying to do here.
In on the commercial, I guess, non-residential spaces, is the lead paint issue popping up there, and how do you measure it when you don't have?
Yeah, look, great question. Yeah, I apologize for not taking that on.
Oh, no, I rambled in the asking of the question, so it's on me.
No, look, I think that is something to be concerned about. The reality, though, Bill, is that where most of the time this pops up is exposure in the home, simply because that's where children are spending so much of their time. And look, I think every parent can remember when their kids are teething, right? They want to chew on everything. It's sort of, I've never had a dog, but I understand dogs chew on stuff too. But for children, like when my kids were little, man, they were biting everything in sight. And so look, it's a real danger for children, particularly in the home, because they're there. And look, during COVID, they've been probably home more often than they were, even a number of years ago. So look, our principal focus is on residential structures. That's what the lead paint laws cover. But there's no question, you're right. There are some other old structures around the state that no doubt have lead paint in them, and the owners of those spaces need to be concerned about it as well.
Attorney General Neronha on lead paint. As always, appreciate your time and access to the office and standing up for Rhode Islanders.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me on. It's good to see you.
Yep. All right. Talk soon. Thanks a lot.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, BTOWN.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.